So now I'm going to do a little customization to some of the plots and graphs that I was working on in the previous video. Right now, again, I'm doing this for my Economics 346 class, which is kind of an introduction to R. There's more stuff you can do with this ggplot2 that I'm definitely not getting into right now. But I'm going to kind of take some basic graphs. I'm going to show some modifications, particularly to line type, width, color, headers. Maybe I'm going to build the title, and axis labels are important. I'm not doing legends because I don't have multiple graphs. I kind of leave one for the end. But one thing you have to do is you have to Google different things that you might need. So one thing is hexadecimal colors. If you're not familiar with it, you can look at 000000. It's actually 3 digits, but because the digits go up, it's kind of like in base 16 instead of base 10. This is actually 3 digits. If you've ever heard of 256 colors, this is kind of where it comes from. And so instead of 100 being 10 times 10, this is basically 16 times 16. And you say, well, what numbers are higher than 10? You actually go to A, B, C, D, E, and F. And so FF is 256. And so it's kind of like RGB, or excuse me, 255. And there's RGB, and these, FF is 255 in another way of looking at it. 0 is obviously 0, 80 is 128, and so forth. So it's just a new way of color. That's kind of known in all sorts of color and web design and stuff, but in terms of just R, you can do a Google search for, you can look at LTY, which is line type. 1 through 6, 1 is solid, and so forth. PCH is all sorts of dot types. I tend to use 20, which is a circle of a certain size, but you can do squares and stuff like that. So you have to Google as you go. There's no real way to do it otherwise, and that's okay. You just have to memorize it and work with it a lot. Right, so here we're just going to go with this inflation data for the 4 countries, and again, I'm going to make the inflation series if you don't have it already. And you can see here the original data have CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index, from 1969, but we take growth rates, and so it starts at 1970. So that's what we have, the 4 countries' inflation rates. We have the histogram we made, and you can see here it's sort of skewed, which is why the mean and the median don't line up perfectly. But it's what it looks like. But it has no. Here's the x-axis, and this is the base title, and it's kind of not that great. So rather than going with the default name, I'm going to give it an X label. So X lab, and in quotes is what the X lab is. Now the Y label is frequency. I'm not changing that. But here it changes it there. And then one thing I could change is what's called main, which is the header. I'm going to call it US inflation. Alright? And so if we do this, alright, again, you can change it to whatever you want. But I'm kind of just sticking with something to show, and you can modify it, accordingly. Now the strip chart that I did with the dots here, it came in the default setting with the squares that are in white, but I'm going to change it to be circles. So again, PCH is the point choice or something. I'm not sure exactly what it stands for, but 20 is circles, these filled in dots. One thing you can do is for a question, you can say, how do you make it green and with the x-axis? And actually we'll just do it right here. Strip chart, and watch this. PCH 20, CEX is the size, it's 0.1. Now this could be in pixels, and so you have to play around with it to see what number matches what you want. Color is green. All right, and so again, of all the colors that were given, some you can do just putting in the words because R understands them. Other times you might need a color wheel or something with that hexadecimal colors. XLab, right? U.S. annual inflation distribution, 1970 to 2017, and so there's really no Y label yet because this is not anything you measure, right? It's all in a line. But look what I'm doing here, right? First of all, the X label, we'll put it down here. This tells you enough information to know what you're looking at. U.S. annual inflation, 1970 to 2017, right? So we know exactly the data set we're working with. We know, because we know what inflation is, these are percentage points, but this tells you what country, how it's measured, and what years. And if you run it, it changes it to little tiny green dots, right? Maybe this is too small, but we can go in and change it. All right, but here's our footer, right? That's our X label. All right, so that's a strip chart. We changed the color, we changed the dot type, we added a label. Now, the scatter plot is useful, especially when you're looking at bivariate relationships. And so the way I'm looking at this is an XY distribution, or so I'm plotting the second column and the third column, and if you do it the default setting, right, and so this is x-axis written before the y-axis, and default setting, right, there's no labels. This is kind of what I told it to do, and these are these white circles with black borders, and we can't really tell what countries they are. We can't really, it's not very aesthetically pleasing, so we're going to change some parameters. We're going to change the shape, the size, and the color. So we're going to replot this. Remember, this is my x, this is my y. My y label is going to be Canada, because that's what the second column is, and the x label is Japan. Excuse me, this is Japan first, then Canada. Notice how this is x, this is y, and I wrote y and x. It doesn't really matter what I put it in. A lot of times people are used to writing y before x, and that's important for a regression as well. Make sure you don't get them flipped. PCH 15, we're going to see what that is. It's going to be a square. I'm going to make it a slightly different size, and then I kind of just picked this CF, that's in that hexadecimal system, and this is basically the same color 3 times, and so it's like equal amounts of red, green, and blue, and that means it's going to be a gray color. Changing it to 0000000 or FF turns it from white to black, and so you can actually choose your exact number of pixels or whatever of each color, so that it's going to be a certain gray, and you can change it to be whatever gray you want. So I made it with gray squares, Canada and Japan, whatever. I can choose whatever I want. Here I'm going to change it back to circles. I'm going to make that a little bit bigger, right? 2 is a little bigger than 1.5. Keep the same color, and then I'm going to give it a title. So main gives you the title overhead. Inflation correlations 1970 to 2017. And here I've got my circles, and I've got this label, right? Last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have a regression line. And so one thing that's interesting is this AB line, right, which is kind of like an XY line. Here it's maybe a little simpler, so I'll do this one first. H equals 5. That's a horizontal line at the value 5. If I put that in here, it's going to put a horizontal line at the value 5. Right? That's not has any economic meaning. I'm just playing around. Vertical line at 6. It's going to be right there. All right, and you can do anything you want to make these lines. It's really useful. A lot of times you can do 0, maybe for negative inflation over time or something. But right now I'm just kind of giving you 2 examples. All right, this is a special line. This is a regression line. I'll talk about this later, but this is from the linear model, regressing y on x. So it's going to be, remember, this is xy. This is y regressed on x. If you're familiar with regression analysis, this is going to give you the regression line from here. And it goes through the dots. I'm not sure how good of a fit it is, but it is there. All right, I'm going to repeat this. I'm not going to do the AB lines here. I'm going to do it with a dashed, thicker regression line. And so how do you make it a dash? You have to find the line type, and so this is off of the thing that I googled. 5 is one of the dashes. 1 is a solid line, and there's different mixtures of dashes in there. This is LWD is line width, and so 2 is thicker than the default, and you can change it to whatever pleases you. All right, but I'm going to start here and replot my original thing, and then I'm going to add this AB line, which again I chose the width and the line type, and it's going to be what I want. I could change the color, I could make it yellow, I could do whatever I want, but right now I'm just doing it with the points and then the regression line. Right, so we've been modifying colors, line types, line width, and then we've been adding X labels. We can also change the Y label, which we just did, and we added a title. I didn't do a legend yet because there's not multiple things to do, but that's kind of the next thing to talk about. So, time series plots. Now later on I'll actually make time series, and I've done that with other classes, but right now, TS plot, I'm just going to do the 4 inflation series. Actually, these are the CPI series, excuse me. And so there, if you know CPI, you know that they're not percentage changes. If you know what CPI is, then you'll know what is the base year. All right? And so 20, 40, 60, 80, you can guess. Right? And there's something special about the fact that they cross, right? And understanding where CPI comes from can answer that question. All right? And then the next question is, how might you need to modify this graph? And that's for later, but right now it's kind of basic, right? It doesn't say anything here, and it has time, which usually I delete. Right? And you can put blank X label, just nothing in here. It'll actually make nothing down here. All right? No title. And then the other thing is which country. Right? And so just thinking about what you might need to do, that's all the things that R can do. Right, so right now we're just making some basic modifications in the base R package, in particular the width, the color, the headers, axis labels, and then we're looking at point types, line types, etc. Not getting into anything more advanced, but as a basic introduction to R, it's important just to think about what you can do and why. All right, and so again, once you have this, you can reprint it much more easily than in some other software. But this is just an introduction into what R can do for this type of data visualization.